Thanks for spending some time with us today. And yeah, I'm going to let those signs do all the prefaces for us. This was a great time. Saw security, saw plenty of warnings, and saw some great mine ruins. The area we're going to be looking at today literally has hundreds of derelict mining rigs, hoists, hoist houses, and more. It's called Vindicator Valley because that was the name of the largest and most productive mine in the area. You can see hundreds of examples in this valley. This is one of my favorite here because it still has ore spewing out of it. Some of them are large, some of them are small, some of them successful, some of them not. And the reason they're all here stacked up on top of each other is because the land was actually leased for close to 100 years to any mine that was willing to pay the lease fee. Different mines were turned off and on based off of the status of their lease, but they basically were all digging right next to each other, going after the same vein of gold and competing for how much gold these mines could pull out of these hills. In fact, these hills are still mined to this day. We're here by the courtesy of the Newmont Mining Corporation. If you do decide to visit, and I encourage you do, be sure to get permission from the CC&V, that's the Cripple Creek and Victor Mining Company. Now with that out of the way, let's have a look at some of this stuff. This here is a magazine, and this would have actually been covered in plaster at the time, so you wouldn't have seen any of that exposed stone or brick. And this was a very strong structure that was used to house all of the TNT. Typically, though, they'd have two of these on a property. One that housed the TNT itself, and the other that housed any other associated detonating chemicals or detonating tools. So there was no accidental exposure and accidental explosion between the two. To my understanding, this property had up to 6 magazines available to it. In fact, you'll notice these magazines are built better than anything else on the property. We've got 3 layers of brick here in the archway, steel reinforced doors, very strong stuff here. But the roof was blown clear off one of these during a labor dispute, and I'll have more on that later. Now, let's take a look at one of the smaller operations here on the property. This is the Christmas Mine. The Christmas Mine was about 605 feet in depth. It had 8 levels to it, but by today's standards and even some of the other mines we're going to look at, it was nothing. It was very small. But this small, hand-operated, primitive mine produced 65,000 troy ounces of gold. Now that's about $1.3 million at the time, but in today's value, it's $84.5 million worth of gold. By comparison, let's have a look at the Teresa Mine. This behemoth structure was originally built in 1895, and it operated all the way to 1986. I mean, that's amazing to me that this thing was operating just a little over 30 years ago. Now, it did have a fire, and it destroyed many of the wooden structures, but what we're looking at here, the steel structures, are for the most part original. The Cycle Mining Company did something kind of unique here. After having leased the land for some time, they had a very large pile of what was called slack or waste ore lying around. And with more modern techniques that developed around 1942, they realized that they could take this waste material and actually separate it with cyanide and convert it into gold. And so they effectively cleaned up all of their mess from several decades of work while also continuing to mine below ground. Now, in the heyday of this mine, around 1920, they weren't so good at cleaning up their mess and putting away their toys, but what they were good at is digging effectively and efficiently. This mine got down to 1,620 feet in depth. It had a multitude of levels. It used a double Morgan system, which allowed you to have people coming up and down the mine shaft at ridiculous speeds. In addition to that, they were supplied power with a 250 horsepower engine, which was a huge advantage for the time, especially when you compare it to other mines like the hand-operated and powerless Christmas Mine that we looked at earlier. What we're beginning to look at here is the Hoist House, but I got a real kick out of this door with its old whitewashing and the metalwork. This would have had to have been blacksmithed right here. This was handmade on the property at that time. But what's left here is the actual hoisting machinery and equipment. And this would have been responsible for bringing all of the people up as well as the gold ore itself. And if you look back here a little bit, I got a real kick out of the fact that you could still see the cycle logo right there. Now, the name kind of changes a little bit depending what documentation you're looking at. Is it the Cycle Gold Company? Is it the Cycle Mining Co.? But the one thing that was consistent as it changed hands over the years was the word cycle. It might seem like the Teresa Mine had all of the advantages. However, it wasn't even the largest mining outfit out here on the property. And some of the hand-operated mines, like the Christmas mines, were able to operate during the labor war that took place or during labor strike because all they needed was their hands. And help to take a little look into the control room here, and these controls look so primitive by comparison to modern standards and really rickety, and I'm sure you really had to use some force here to pull these up, and literally people were using these as late as 1986 to pull up human beings and gold ore from thousands of feet under the ground. Something I found interesting is there's really not a lot of light fixtures in here, and if you were pulling a night shift in here at one point, it would have been very, very dark. And I'm kind of scanning around the room here, and I'm looking for any sort of light switches or anything. We have a breaker box there, and then these porcelain knobs or nobules, for lack of a better term, these porcelain things here, which I'm assuming had lights strung from them at some point in time. Now, this would have been about 1934 construction, from what I understand, because that's when everything was rebuilt after the fire. So compared to some of the other stuff we looked at, this is a little bit newer, but all of this steel structure is original from 1895. At that time, they took the opportunity to also equip the shaft with modern counterweight technology, basically putting it on par with an elevator, something that's a little more comfortable to ride as compared to the jolting ride it used to be. And what we're looking at here would have actually been the changing house. So they would have came right out of the mine here and gone to the left, hung up their hats and overalls and whatnot. And then once they're done with that, they'd go about their day, evening, or whatever it may be. Off to the right here was the communication house. And this is purposefully set as far as possible from the machinery we just saw, for obvious reasons, so that they could use this telephone system to communicate to people down at the bottom of the mine, as well as the operator of the hoist system. There's a little heater there. I mean, I just imagine somebody sitting in here in the late 80s just freezing next to that heater. It was around this point that it dawned on me that this property was just too vast, has too many stories to tell for me to squeeze it all into one video. I decided to focus primarily here on the Teresa Mine, but good gravy, this place has so much more history. For the most part, the Teresa Mine was a peaceful mine, and it was operated by a well-known family in the area, the Bebe family, who also operated this boarding house. In fact, the Bebe family lived on this land and oversaw the mines for over 5 generations. This is their home that they lived in up until the 50s, when the Vindicator mine itself closed. And the Vindicator mine has quite the sordid tale to tell. I saw so much in the valley that honestly, I can't fit it all into one video. But just know that the Vindicator mine was host to the largest US terrorist attack before 1993. While that's sad, it's a very interesting tale to tell, and I look forward to bringing it to you shortly. As always, thanks for watching and spending some time with us.